Welcome, everyone. My name's Neil Howman from 202 Communications. Welcome to this live on event, panel and networking event on sustainability in streaming. But before we start, and before I introduce you to our two expert guests, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Karen Cohen, who's going to give you all a very quick tour of the platform that we're on, and then we'll get it underway. Over to you, Karen. Okay, great. All right, so this is the platform that we're on. You can see your name here on the left-hand side that shows what room we're in. It's very easy to move around on this. You can choose the room you want to go to by clicking on it on the icon, or you can choose the room you want to go to by clicking on the name. And you'll get a pop-up to leave the meeting you're in and join another one, and magically transported into another room with new people. So what we'll do is we'll enjoy our panel session, and then after that, you'll be able to just jump into the various rooms. If you have a question for Jason or Barbara, they'll each have their own rooms that you can go into and have conversations with them. If you want to just chit chat socially, there's other rooms to jump into. And that's about it. So that's how we go. Thank you, Karen. I think she just, Karen's stolen my script there, because I was just going to tell you exactly the same thing. The way we're going to go is we're going to have a brief panel conversation. I'm hoping it will be informative, informal. We'll probably talk for 20, 25 minutes. Let's see how things go. And then really we want to encourage you, our audience, to participate, explore the platform, explore the environment we're in, talk to each other, ask questions of each other, talk to someone you've never met before. How about that? You know, but you can see where the rooms are and just enjoy this event, informal but informative. That's what I hope it will be. Right, without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists. I'm very, very honored to be joined by Jason Thibeault from Streaming Video Alliance. Jason, welcome. Thanks very much. You're in Texas, is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Live and direct from Texas. So Jason is a man of many talents, technologist, a businessman, a software architect, author. Jason, stop me if I'm going too far. I mean,
no, you can add a bunch of stuff there. I'm okay. Just keep going.
There was a great thing I was reading on your LinkedIn profile, actually. So Jason is Executive Director of Streaming Video Alliance, amongst all those other things. And you said that you're always happy to be talking about what the Streaming Video Alliance does, its work, attracting new members and exchanging ideas, to anyone who will stay around long enough to listen, which I'm so grateful you put that, and I hope that applies today as well, which I'm sure it will. So you're very welcome, Jason. Thanks very much indeed for your
Thank you for the welcome. Appreciate it.
And our other panelist is Barbara Lange, whom many of you may know from over a decade at the helm of SMPTE. Barbara, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. And you're in the New York area.
New York. I'm live from New York.
Live and direct from New York.
Saturday night?
It is.
Not quite.
The time flies. I could have sworn it was still only a Tuesday. But after 12 years, Barbara, you've launched a new venture called Kaibo 121. Maybe yes. You could give us the brief headlines about Kaibo 121. And obviously I'm expecting you to say how impressed you were that I pronounced it correctly.
I am. I'm very impressed. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for doing this event on this topic. I think it's clearly something that's very important around the world and in our industry as well. So I rebooted, I should say, a consultancy that my husband had. And when I decided to go out on my own, we rebooted it called Kaibo 121. And it's a consultancy that's really there to help guide media tech companies on their path to sustainability. Many organizations want to do something in sustainability, but it's complex and they don't know where to start. And that's where I hope that I can step in and guide these companies on their path to really make a lasting difference.
It's a very, very interesting point. And I'm sure that we're going to explore that a bit further, because I think the further you go into this topic, the more complex and nuanced you see. And we'll hopefully explore that a little bit further. So that's our panel. So welcome both. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to try and just cover off quite a number of points, but probably in a very sort of headline sort of way. But I would encourage, again, our audience to take some time, speak to Barbara, speak to Jason, and I know some of us in our audience here also have a great amount of opinions and insight into this topic. So I think Barbara and Jason have very generously agreed to stick around for a little bit at the end. So please take that opportunity, everyone. Okay, so a bit of background, just a brief personal anecdote is I can recall speaking to a very good industry friend of mine, but way over 5 years ago at an IBC. We were just talking about the industry, the direction it was going, not specifically streaming, but just the broadcast media and entertainment industry in general. And he said, I think environmental issues are going to be really, really big. And I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting. And I thought, yes, that was great. And then I have to say, from my personal opinion, I heard nothing really for the next 4, 5 years. You would see an occasional article which would be putting the emphasis on, how this reduces power consumption, maybe. But the broader sort of sustainability environmental issue appears to have come to the forefront relatively late. Jason, would you agree? What's your take on where we are now and where we've come from? And
yeah, I mean, again, personal anecdote. I worked at Limelight Networks, which is a very large CDN. Right. It was probably about 10 years ago. Limelight kind of experimented and then went on an adventure really to optimize their software in order to improve the power consumption of their servers, right? So they're non-cloud based, right? They're physical boxes. And, what they came back with was a way to measure the effectiveness of a box based on its wattage consumption. And it was, at that point, it was really interesting. I was like, wow. I guess that, that's really an issue. And I had started looking in at, how Yahoo was constructing data centers with, very big open pass-through air for natural cooling. And, you look at some of these big, so call them, earthed data centers that are deep in mountains, again, using the cold of the, of the mountains and the climate itself. And so I got really interested in it. And then as I transitioned into the SVA, there was always at the back of my mind, what are we doing around sustainability and improving the amount of power that we use to launch and run these services? And I know that a lot of my member companies, they, Verizon and Comcast and these folks, they have initiatives and they're doing things, but, I think there's just a lot of do-it-yourself kind of attitude in the industry right now. And I think that's where we're at is, the Greening of Streaming, which is an organization that's represented here today, in the attendee list, it came about last year in an effort to sort of bring the industry together to start talking about this holistically. So that's kind of where I think we're at, is we're now starting to talk about it as an industry issue, not as a company problem, but as a whole situation that we can all benefit from if we collectively collaborate on how to solve it.
Well, that's really interesting. And again, some of the issues you raised there about getting more cohesion, I think we'll revisit a little bit later. Yeah. And I would like to welcome Dom from Greening of Streaming. Partially, Dom, because I was reading an article where you're quoted fairly extensively, and I may even regurgitate some of those quotes later. So you're very welcome, and it's not plagiarism. I'll give you big billing every time I mention
It's just research, not plagiarism. Research.
Thank you,
exactly.
Jason. You can come again as well, Jason. You're very welcome again for backing me up there. Barbara, your personal journey to that, obviously working as executive director of SIMPTE for 12 years, you get a very good view across the broadcast industry in general. When were you personally becoming aware of these issues being much more to the fore?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I recall when I joined SIMPTE in 2010, there was an issue of the journal right around that time that was about the green facilities. And I think that's the only issue that we published in 12 years on sustainability. We talked a lot, and I think just like Jason, there was a little bit of discussion around it, but as a topic, it never really surfaced. Really until very recently, perhaps in the last year or two. I think in my mind, it's a lot about awareness. There are different organizations doing things, like publicly held companies are all very public about their statements on their websites about how green they are or when they will be net zero or what have you. But that's a very small portion. And the rest of the industry, I think, is still sort of, it's complex, and it's no pun intended, although sort of, it's like boiling the ocean. You don't know where to start. And you do need some experts out there and organizations like the Greening of Streaming and others to do the research, to put out the data points so that we can all speak in the same language. And right now, we're not. And I think that's part of the issue. Now, the good news is that there is a much stronger push towards sustainability. But I think things like this session, I think at industry conferences, there should be always some talk of sustainability, because it is going to become more and more important to us as consumers and private people, never mind as how we work in media tech industry.
I think we'll be visiting some of the drivers for this change as we go through. But Remy Baudouin from ATEM, who are obviously big players in greening of stream, one of the first members of the greening of streaming organization, said it very well in a TV technology article earlier this year, where it used to be the considerations were just the business and the technology. He was suggesting that the sustainability angle is actually the third pillar of consideration when people are making their buying decisions. And and I think that's, Barbara?
Well, I would argue yes, but I think that's going to change. If you look at Mark Harrison's report from the DPP, his CES report of 2022, the number one topic that he saw at a CES, which we know was a much smaller CES than usual, but still the big players were there making their statements. Sustainability was the number one topic. Right. From these companies. And so I think it's, to me, everything's a marketing issue on one level, right? It's an awareness of where does that sustainability fit into my world of view, whether I'm the CEO of Verizon, or I'm CEO of a small, media tech startup, or as a consumer. I think it's just going to become much more visible to all of us.
Yeah. Jason, would you broadly agree with that? I mean, it seemed to make sense when I read the quote that you've got the business case, you've got the technology case, and you've got this third major raft of consideration now, which is what is the impact environmentally speaking or sustainable. Would you broadly agree, or would you?
I would broadly agree. I mean, I think there are some other pillars like diversity and inclusion and things like that, which are becoming equally important for corporations and really sort of, we'll call it corporate ethics. I mean, because when it comes down to it, the bottom line drives all, right? So if I have to spend a little bit more money on power, but I can generate more revenue, chances are as a business, I'm going to choose to do that. Where I think we're going to see some real improvements is as technology vendors so the folks like Atem, as they begin to explore new ways to architect their hardware or their software that actually consumes less power. So we're going to see innovation drive out of that demand for sustainability. And it's great if right now, if it's just a marketing tag, fine. But if it drives innovation for people to optimize what they sell into an OTT provider, then fantastic. Then market away. Put the rubber stamps on it. We're sustainable. Whatever it takes for them to make the changes that are needed to be made.
Let's pursue that sort of innovation path for a bit. Just a couple of numbers for our audience. A couple of recent statistics. Netflix, I know, Barbara, we can explore this a bit further, but Netflix, just the headlines were that they did a 128-day period of research on global viewing of their top 10 shows. So this was last year. Squid Game, Stranger Things, Bridgerton were on. It amounted to 6 billion viewer hours. And then the Carbon Trust did some calculations and said these are the emissions of these 6 billion hours of watching was the equivalent of 1.13 billion miles of car travel. They like to, which would take you from here to Saturn, apparently. In
a car, okay. That's a long road trip.
Exactly. YouTube emitting, in a year, the same sort of CO2 emissions of a good-sized city and things like this. Right. And of course, with COVID, the pandemic, and driving that probably even further through the roof. We've got, these are serious numbers when you think of aviation and automotive being the huge emitters. These are enormous numbers. So that's our problem. It's this power consumption. So picking up on your point, Jason, some of the initiatives, some of the solutions, obviously it's going to be technology driven, I presume. Would you agree with that, Jason?
Yeah, it will be technology driven, yes.
Yeah. So what is available now? What are people doing now to reduce these emissions? And what is coming down the stream? Also, no pun intended there. What's coming down the stream in the near future? Jason, perhaps you could share some of those ideas.
Yeah, and right now I don't know of any specific technologies that are in play. I think right now there is a general consensus of we don't quite know what to do and how to do it. I mean, the working groups at the Greening of Streaming, they're really exploring this concept of how do we talk about this topic, with a standard lexicon. How do we measure power? How do we measure power in relation to bytes served? How do we measure power in relation to infrastructure spin up, right? So for companies that are using the cloud, what's the power consumption when they have to scale versus just delivering to their normal amount and their normal infrastructure? So there's lots of things that have to be defined first. And mind you, plenty of companies are experimenting with, how do I optimize my TCP stack so that it engages my NIC less often, right? So less power to my NIC, sustained NIC, but I get a greater amount of bits pushed out of it. Like there are companies are all exploring what can we do. But there's not necessarily a widget or a technology that's on the horizon that's going to solve our power problems, unless we decide that we're going to just put wheels and hamsters in data centers and let them power it. I'm sure that solar is making a huge play in terms of data center, power consumption, renewable energy sources, obviously wind, water, turbine, all of that. All of these big data center companies are exploring ways to reduce the amount of power that they have to consume on fossil fuels. And so obviously that's a big push, but yeah, from a technology side, everyone's trying to figure it out themselves. And the Greening of Streaming, that's going to serve as a gregive place for everybody to come together and talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yes, I mean, again, picking up on, sorry to jump in, Barbara, I'll give you the opportunity. René Baudouin, again from Atem, was mentioning general headlines about looking at, lower bit rates, improved compression technologies, single workflows of live and time-shifted video, on-demand processing improvements, all those sort of things. I was just trying to sort of find out where we're at with, are those sort of off the shelf, some of those solutions now, or are they just,
and Barbara, jump in here, that everyone's doing it themselves.
Yeah, and I think everybody's doing all of those things. And that's good, right? Everybody is doing that. And what I feel is missing is understanding, as Jason pointed out, what do these measurements mean? What is the cost of my HDR, 4K, fancy production when it comes to transporting that image through the workflow to the consumer versus the SD version that's going to go to my iPhone, right? And if we don't know these things, I mean, we can know them, we just don't know them yet, and have a consistent way of speaking about these things, then we can make decisions, and then decisions can be driven by your carbon emissions with this format is X, and your carbon emissions on this is Y. Yesterday, I bought my ticket to NAB, and the airlines are telling me how much carbon emission my flight is going to produce. And so I think when that becomes more mainstream, even within our industry, when we understand the carbon emission cost of the various aspects of the workflow, then I think we can make smarter decisions. And I think that's what's missing. And the other piece that I would also mention is that there are different parts of the workflow. There is the production part where you're on set and you can do all sorts of things to reduce your carbon footprint right off the bat. You can get e-vehicles for your talent. You can use battery operated generators. You can recycle your materials. And so that's, I'll call it a physical sustainability plan, right? And many productions have sustainability officers now on set, and that's their job. But then what happens when it's in the can, so to speak, and it needs to move through the process? Now it's going to be processed in the cloud, right? Editing in the cloud, all the magic happens in the cloud. What does that cost? That's where we're a little squishy. And then we get to the distribution part, which today is pretty much streaming. Broadcast, broadcast and streaming, even to cinemas, it's being streamed in a way. And that, I guess, we're getting a little closer to some real data. But once we understand that, then we can have real conversations, and the business people can make real decisions about what technology they want to deploy. And I think that's kind of where we are. And it is a little bit of a free-for-all right now.
I'm picking up on that very, very clearly from both of you, that there's an awful lot of positioning, a lot of thinking going on. And, I wonder, it must be very confusing for people who have the best aspirations and the best intentions in all aspects of their business to be more sustainable, more environmentally aware. But it's confused. I'm hearing all the things, and maybe it's understandable because this is in its infancy, but this is like,
and we haven't even talked about scope.
This is quite a, but I wonder, here's the devil's advocate question a little bit. When Netflix announces that it's going to be carbon neutral by the end of this year, right? We know that it's not the whole picture. Am I right in that? Barbara, I think you have some insight, and then Jason.
Yeah, I don't think it's the full picture. They talk about their own productions. They won't talk about the, and this is where scope comes in, right? So what does scope 1, 2, and 3 mean? Scope 1 is your emissions as a company, what you control. You measure your carbon footprint, right? Everything that it costs for you to produce your product. Scope 2 is the measurement of the energy, and where does that energy source from? So scope 2 is if you're, if you're really doing everything electric, where's the source of that electricity coming from? Is it fossil fuels? Is it renewable? What's that? Scope 3 then is the real troublemaker, because scope 3 is your value chain, your supply chain, up and down the value chain. Who's supplying you, and what are you delivering to your consumers. And that's very difficult to measure. And I would say that we would need to read into what these companies say net zero is. My guess it's net zero around scope 1. It's not net zero around scope 3. That's going to be very, very challenging to measure.
So Jason, do we need more standards which the whole industry can understand? What do we need, Jason? What would, if we could have the magic wand tomorrow to help these, small, medium, large, everybody be on the same page, everybody in the same direction? What do we need?
No, I mean, and Barbara just mentioned it, right? It's, what does Netflix mean when they say carbon neutral? What does that mean? And and talking to Dom at the Greening of Streaming, he talked about this, the UN Science-Based Target Initiative, right? And so aligning the industry to things that are accepted, say like, this is how we're going to define carbon neutral. Right. This is how we're going to define, wattage per server. This is and that's the first step. If we don't have that, we don't have a common lexicon. We are all going to be doing what we're doing now, which is just, I'm going to define it as I want to define it and how it makes me look good. And here we go. So yes, we need standards. We need a common dictionary, a common glossary, a common lexicon. And then once there, those can create and give rise to best practices, which can in turn give rise to specifications, which can be applied to vendors, which can then be used in measurement by a company like Netflix to say, here's my whole supply chain and all of the impact it has on my footprint, and this therefore means I have a carbon footprint of X. And people will say like, yes, I understand that. You're completely transparent, so we get it. Yes, that we need standards, big time.
Yeah, but just to pick up on you mentioned Dom Robinson. Welcome, Dom, from Greening of Streaming. I think it was the Guardian article from last year. Net zero has become the new carbon tax offsetting sort of thing. Right. And, well, no, I'm suggesting that was, and for exactly the same the reasons we've been exploring here. I guess the standards as well, it really would mitigate against, wouldn't it, the sort of greenwashing idea that certain, I think, Barbara, would you?
I think there are definitely some form of standards that are required. A lot of this is physics. It's not like recreating anything. So that's the good news. We have a lot of smart people in this industry, and we can figure these sorts of things out. But I also think it's education and knowledge sharing. I think that's equally important. So people really do understand, the crass marketing versus the real, like, I'm committing to this because it's, it's corporate responsibility, that sort of thing. Yeah. So knowledge sharing, I think, is important.
Yeah. Barbara, we were talking in rehearsal, because everybody here, this is all rehearsed, right? Every single word is memorized here in this. None of this is made up. But in rehearsal yesterday, you did mention that there's a sort of 2 or 3 gears on this, that the EU in many ways is ahead of things. Europe is ahead of things on its initiatives to try and pull this together than the US. That's going to put a brake on things, is it? There has to be acceleration to a...
I think there are some drivers, and I think in Europe, it's somebody. And it might have been Dom. He's getting a lot of attention today, which is great. I think he's the one that told me he figures that the EU is about 5 years ahead of the US. And I think that's a true statement. So the EU, doing all sorts of things, organizations, companies must, report on sustainability issues and things of that sort. And there are all sorts of programs in Europe. In the US, only last week did the SEC make an announcement. So the Securities Exchange Commission, which is the overseas publicly traded companies, is proposing a rule change. So it's not done yet, but it's open for public comment, where they would require companies to report on their sustainability efforts as part of their financial reporting. And I think that's huge. I think that's a big driver. Investors, there are already ESG investors, right? Environmental sustainability and governance investors. So they care about what their companies do in that respect. So I think investors are a big driver. I think another driver for our community will be the customers. The customers are going to say, it's not to say that they're going to watch, Disney Plus over Netflix because Disney might be more green, but it will make a difference, I think, for some. And I think the workforce is going to be a bigger driver than we perhaps understand right now. The younger generation, someone quoted this to me. I don't know the source, so I can't say it's a true statement, but that some young people figure they would care more about a company's sustainability message than the money they would earn. So that if that's a true statement, that's a big driver. And I think that will force the United States to push, even get closer to the Europeans on this respect.
The EY Consumer Index, they ran some survey of consumer habits. 43% of global consumers, now this is a slightly general figure, but I think it's a direction of travel, want to buy from companies or organizations that benefit society and the environment. So I think there is, that's very interesting. Just to say to our audience, thanks so much for all the questions you're putting in the chat. I'll try and share some with our panel, but it's just great to see that you're talking, and I think some are answering as well. So please, we'll be looking to perhaps bring our conversation, the panel conversation, to a gentle close, but please stick around. Keep these conversations going. It's really good to hear. Just one on the, let me see. Here's one from Paul. Thanks, Paul. Does end user screen size matter to the sustainability concern? That may be one for you, Jason, to start with. What does that?
And it depends on what you're talking about, right? So back to Barbara's point on the supply chain, right? Where's that screen being sourced? Who's building the device? Are they sustainable? Are they green? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, yes, what bit rate can I encode and produce and deliver to that screen? And does it need to be 4K? No, the answer is no. So OTT providers are getting smarter right now, using logic to determine, based on the user agent that's requesting the video, what bit rate to deliver. So you deliver a 4K to a 80-inch TV, you do not deliver it to an iPhone, because your visual acuity will notice no difference between a 1080 and a 4K on a small size screen. So yeah, the screen is not necessarily a relation or measure of sustainability, but it's a factor in being more sustainable by choosing not to deliver a very high consumption energy bit rate to it.
Another consumption equation question, also from Paul. Thank you for this one, Paul. How does the breakdown of hardwired power devices versus rechargeable battery devices factor into the consumption equation, or does it at the moment?
I think that's an excellent question. I think what we're finding is that some older, we always think that newer is better and more efficient, and probably most of the time it is. But the most sustainable delivery of or consuming of content is an over-the-air broadcast, because it's the most efficient. It's broadcasting one to many, right? And so in the same vein, I don't know the answer to that specifically, but I would say that a hard wire in some respects might be more sustainable than a rechargeable situation. But you have to run the numbers, and at some point the rechargeable will be better.
And I'll add to that, so we talk about OTA and Wi-Fi and wireless, and when it comes down to sustainability for content consumption, it is about wattage per CPU cycle, right? Yeah. So it's how much is my CPU or the electronics on my device engaged for how long? So when you talk about wireless, right, if I want to watch something wireless or OTA, there's a chip, it's a radio that's in the device that's on all the time during that transmission. So it's consuming a tremendous amount of power. So is it more sustainable to say, rather than watching it wirelessly or over the air, that that's downloaded at some point in an off-peak moment so that I can watch it later on?
Right. Right.
And obviously there are lots of considerations here between on demand and live and things like that. But that's the real measure we have to get to, is how much power am I my device consuming, whether it's rechargeable or non-rechargeable, whether it's wireless or wired. How much is it consuming during the process of watching, which involves the decoding of it? And so, of course, then you have power consumption at the CPU or the GPU. So there's all these little pieces we have to look at. So it's for me, not a super easy black and white answer to that question. It's just lots of variables.
I think one thing to recommend, and I don't do it myself, actually, is shut your machinery off when you're not using it.
Yes.
I mean, just turn it off. That would be, a small step, but that's part of the process. And we have to retrain ourselves to do that sort of thing.
It's a very good point, Barbara, because the way the energy bills have gone up in the UK over the past few weeks, everybody's turning off their standby devices just on the micro scale. So the macro scale,
that's right.
We do have to change our perception, I think. And I'm very glad you mentioned that, because I think there's got to be a sort of mind shift, not just from the industry side, but consumer side as well, possibly.
That's right.
That may take long.
Right. Even a tiny consumption of power during standby. Like I'm looking over, like I've got 12 devices over here, from battery backups to my router to a couple of hubs and I'm just like, that consumes a 24/7 constant stream of power. And so all those little incremental things add up to a carbon footprint related to me being able to watch a streaming video on some device in my house.
Yeah. Right. And you take that example and you just imagine that Jason is a, Verizon, right? And what that, and all those things that are left on. Well, and I mean, I'm talking at scale, the big stuff, not, right? So, I mean, that's what it takes. And sorry, just one other point, Neil, in terms of innovation, I think that's where a lot of good innovation can happen, is to, and I know, again, Dom and his group are talking about this, is to have more efficient data centers where bursting and downtime, and that is all part of the mix. And if that gets better and will get better, then that contributes to the improvement. So it's
absolutely. Yeah. So I'm very conscious of our time, and I want to actually open this out to our audience and our guests. So, we're going to stick around and we're going to move around the environment, and we've created special places for Jason and Barbara, so you can go and meet them there. I'll hang around here on the main stage, so that'll clear the main stage pretty quickly, I should think. Just one last thing. It's always what do you see in the future sort of thing, but it seems like an awful lot needs to be sorted out, but we don't have banks of time to sort this. There is a clock ticking very, very loudly. Yeah. So if things could progress the way that you wanted them to over the next 5 years, what would be a realistic thing for us to be achieving in 5 years? I know it's a massive question. I only want a short answer. No pressure. No, but Barbara, what would you say is a realistic way forward over the next 5 years or so?
I think the industry in all its forms it needs to talk about sustainability all the time. It needs to be part of every organization's strategy. Conferences need to talk about it. The media need to talk about it, and I think we need to educate. We need to educate the industry on what it means to function in a sustainable way. The time is ticking. I mean, some research says in 8 years will be past our target, and then we're doomed, right? So we don't even have that much time, and I think it's in our industry, and it's small compared to all the other industries that keep us going every day. But I think if we can begin that awareness and work on standards and work on efficiencies, I think we can contribute wisely to a more sustainable future. So to me, it's education and knowledge sharing, really.
Wonderful. Jason.
Yeah, so for me, it's not just talking about it, it's actually basing decisions, technology decisions within streaming with sustainability in mind. So we used to talk about this in security, right? People would build stuff and then at the end of it, they would go, okay, how do I make this secure? And then we got to a point where it's like, wait, when we start building lists, let's ask the question, how do I make it secure at this part and the next part and the next part? Sustainability has to do the same thing. We're looking at it reactively now. We get to the end, we're like, okay, how do I make this more sustainable? No. When we imagine building a new piece of technology, re-architecting a part of the workflow, creating a new piece of content, at every decision point along that chain, they have to ask the question, okay, how do we ensure that this contributes to our sustainability? That I think really needs to happen. And like security, it will. It's just, will it happen fast enough? I don't know. And part of the problem is I don't think people know how to ask that question at certain points in those decision-making processes. So again, groups like Greening of Streaming are going to help.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think that's a really good note to end on the formal panel discussion, as it were. And thank you both to the Streaming Video Alliance and the work that you're doing in collaboration with many others, and to you, Barbara. This is very vital and valuable work, and I would invite all of our audience here to take the time, speak to Barbara, speak to Jason, speak to each other, and let's try and get this solved or moved on very quickly. So thank you all very much for this. Please
thank you, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much, both of you, Barbara, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, appreciate it. All right.